I was hiding in the pantry, trying not to cry, when I heard my grandmother turn up the TV volume. The sound of the news anchor's voice drowned out everything. My sobs, his shouting, the sound of things breaking. She knew exactly what was happening. They all did. My stepfather had pushed me too far this time, and my own family chose to look away. But they had no idea what I was planning. They thought I was weak, broken, defenseless. They were wrong. What happened next would cost them everything: their reputation, their fortune, their freedom, and I would make sure the whole world watched them fall. My name is Natalie Hayes, and until 3 years ago, I believed in the illusion of family. At 28, I should have known better. But grief has a way of making you cling to whatever comfort remains. When my father died of a heart attack 5 years ago, I watched my mother crumble into someone I barely recognized. She found her salvation in Charles Whitmore, a real estate mogul who swept into our lives with promises of stability and prosperity. Ravenwood, Illinois, is the kind of town where everyone knows your business but pretends they don't. Tree-lined streets, colonial houses with perfectly manicured lawns, country clubs where deals worth millions are sealed over 18 holes of golf. Charles fit right in. He had the right smile, the right handshake, the right connections. Within 6 months of dating my mother, he'd moved us into his sprawling estate on Maple Ridge Drive. From the outside, we were the portrait of success. Charles ran Whitmore Development Group, a company that had its fingers in every major construction project from Chicago to Springfield. My mother, Linda, managed the books. She'd always been good with numbers, though lately, she seemed to spend more time staring at spreadsheets than actually working on them. And then there was my grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, my father's mother, who'd moved in after his death. She presided over our household like a queen surveying her domain, more concerned with how things appeared than how they actually were. Appearances matter, Natalie, she'd tell me at least once a week, usually when criticizing my choice to work at a nonprofit instead of joining the family business. The Hayes name means something in this town. But what did it mean? Really? I'd grown up believing it meant integrity, kindness, the values my father had taught me. Now it seemed to mean something else entirely, maintaining a facade at any cost, even if the foundation was rotting beneath. Charles had been charming at first. He'd won my mother over with grand gestures, surprise trips to Napa Valley, diamond earrings for no reason, donations to her favorite charities in her name. He'd even tried to win me over, offering to pay off my student loans, suggesting I come work for him. Family takes care of family, he'd say with that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. But I saw through him. Maybe it was the way he'd grip my mother's wrist a little too tightly when he thought no one was watching, or how his jaw would clench when anyone disagreed with him, even about something trivial. Or perhaps it was the way his business associates would go quiet when he entered a room, their fear disguised as respect. The house itself reflected our family dynamics, beautiful on the surface, but full of dark corners. 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a kitchen that could have been featured in Architectural Digest, but there were unspoken rules about which spaces belonged to whom. Charles's study was off-limits. The basement where he conducted his private meetings was forbidden territory, and the pantry, God, the pantry, would become the setting for my worst nightmare. I'd started noticing things about 6 months after they married, documents left on the printer with numbers that didn't add up, phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, business partners who disappeared from the picture without explanation. My mother grew thinner, more nervous. She'd developed a tremor in her hands that she blamed on too much caffeine, but I knew better. Eleanor, meanwhile, had thrown her full support behind Charles. She saw in him the continuation of the Hayes legacy, the power, the money, the influence. She'd even started signing documents for him, using her position on various community boards to smooth over his business dealings. When I tried to voice my concerns, she'd wave them away. "You're too sensitive, Natalie, too idealistic. The real world requires compromise." But there's a difference between compromise and complicity. between keeping peace and enabling destruction. I was about to learn just how far my family would go to maintain their perfect image, and how much I'd have to sacrifice to expose the truth beneath. That night in October still haunts me. The dinner had started normally enough. Charles discussing his latest project, the Lakeshore Estates development. While my mother nodded along mechanically, Eleanor was praising the wine selection, something about a vintage she'd tried in Bordeaux. I should have kept quiet, should have just eaten my salmon and excused myself early like I usually did. But then Charles turned to me with that calculating look I'd grown to despise. "Natalie, I need you to sign some papers tomorrow, just a formality for the trust restructuring." I set down my fork carefully. "What kind of papers?" "Nothing you need to concern yourself with. Investment documents, tax benefits." He waved his hand dismissively, already considering the matter closed. "I'd like to review them first." The temperature in the room dropped. My mother's hand froze halfway to her water glass. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. Charles's smile tightened. "That won't be necessary. Your signature is just a technicality for the family's financial security." "Then it shouldn't be a problem if I have my lawyer look at them." That's when his mask slipped. His face flushed red, the vein in his temple pulsing. "Your lawyer? Since when do family members need lawyers between them?" "Since you started asking me to sign documents without reading them." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You ungrateful little—" He caught himself, that practiced control sliding back into place. "Let's discuss this in the kitchen." I followed him, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. The kitchen was his territory for these discussions, far enough from the dining room that voices wouldn't carry, but not so isolated that anyone would question two family members having a private conversation. "You're going to sign those papers," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Your mother's entire financial future depends on this deal going through." "What deal? What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing that concerns you. Just do what you're told for once." "No." The word hung between us like a challenge. I saw his hands clench into fists, watched the careful control he maintained in public beginning to crack. "You think you're so smart," he hissed. "Working at that pathetic nonprofit, acting like you're better than us. You live in my house, eat my food, and you dare to question me?" "It's my mother's house too, and my grandmother's." That's when he snapped. The shove came so suddenly I didn't have time to brace myself. I stumbled backward, crashing into the open pantry door, my shoulder hitting the shelving unit hard enough to rattle the canned goods. I fell to my knees among the bags of rice and boxes of pasta, pain shooting through my shoulder. "Stay down," he snarled, looming over me. "Learn your place." I pressed myself against the back wall of the pantry, trying to make myself small, trying not to cry. The tears came anyway, not from the physical pain, but from the betrayal of it all. This man who had promised to take care of our family, who my mother had trusted with our lives. That's when I heard it, the sudden blare of the television from the living room. The volume increased dramatically, the sound of a news anchor's voice echoing through the house. Tonight's breaking story from Washington. Eleanor. She was in the living room, barely 30 feet away. She had heard the commotion, heard the crash, heard everything, and her response was to turn up the TV to drown it out. Charles noticed too. A satisfied smirk crossed his face. "See? Even your precious grandmother knows better than to interfere. This family understands loyalty. You're the only problem here." I stayed in that pantry for 20 minutes after he left, surrounded by the mundane domesticity of stored food and household supplies, processing what had just happened. My shoulder throbbed. My knees were bruised from the fall. But worse than any physical pain was the realization that I was utterly alone in a house full of people who were supposed to love me. When I finally emerged, my mother was in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean. She didn't look at me. "Mom." "Don't." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Just don't make things worse." Eleanor was still in the living room, the TV now at a normal volume, watching her show as if nothing had happened. When I passed by the doorway, she glanced at me briefly. "You should ice that shoulder," she said simply, then turned back to her program. That night, I lay in bed replaying every moment, every word, every betrayal. The pantry wasn't just where Charles had shown his true nature. It was where my entire family had revealed theirs. They would rather preserve their comfortable lie than protect me from the monster they'd invited into our home. But in that darkness, something else was born. Not fear, but determination. They thought they'd broken me in that pantry. They thought I'd learned my place. They had no idea what they'd actually created. The days following the pantry incident were a masterclass in collective denial. My mother brought me breakfast in bed the next morning, something she hadn't done since I was 12, but couldn't meet my eyes. She set the tray down with trembling hands, murmuring something about having a busy day at the office, and fled before I could speak. "Natalie, we need to talk about last night," she finally said 3 days later, cornering me in my room. "Yes, we do." She closed the door behind her, wringing her hands. "You need to understand. Charles is under enormous pressure. The Lakeshore Estates project, it's everything. $47 million, our entire future. That doesn't excuse—" "Please," her voice cracked, "just sign the papers. For me, for the family. We can't afford to lose everything." "What exactly would we lose? Mom? The house? The cars? Or just the illusion that everything is perfect?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "You don't understand what it's like. After your father died, I had nothing. Charles saved us. Dad left us plenty. We weren't destitute. That money wouldn't have lasted forever. And Eleanor, she has expectations, standards. Charles maintains those for us." I stared at my mother, this woman who had once been a successful accountant, who had taught me to stand up for myself, who had read me stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. When had she become so small? "Mom, what's really going on with Lakeshore Estates?" Her face went pale. "Nothing. It's just business." But I knew she was lying. That tremor in her hands was worse now, and I'd caught her crying in the bathroom twice this week. Eleanor was less subtle in her approach. She summoned me to the sitting room like a queen granting an audience. "Your behavior is unacceptable," she announced, not bothering with preamble. "Charles Whitmore has done more for this family's standing than you could ever appreciate." "Standing? Is that what we're calling it?" "Don't be clever with me, young lady. You're 28 years old, working at a nonprofit that barely pays rent, living off the generosity of others. The least you can do is not sabotage the people actually maintaining this family's position." "He pushed me. Eleanor, I didn't see anything of the sort." Her eyes were cold, unflinching. What I saw was a spoiled girl having a tantrum over being asked to contribute to the family's welfare for once. "You turned up the TV. You heard everything, and you turned up the TV." For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Guilt, perhaps, or shame. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. The news was on. There was an important segment about the Federal Reserve. Unlike you, I stay informed about things that actually matter. That's when I realized the full extent of my isolation. This wasn't just about Charles being abusive or my mother being weak. This was about something bigger, something that had its hooks in both of them. The universe seemed to agree, because that afternoon, my phone rang. Daniel Morrison. We'd dated for 2 years before Charles entered the picture, breaking up amicably when his job took him to New York. He now worked for a hedge fund, analyzing companies for potential investment. "Nat, I know this is out of the blue, but I need to ask you something. Is your family involved with Whitmore Development Group?" My heart skipped. "Why?" "I can't say much, but be careful. We've been looking at some of their financials for a potential investment, and things don't add up. The Lakeshore Estates project especially. There are red flags everywhere." "What kind of red flags?" "The kind that usually end with federal investigations, shell companies, inflated valuations, permit applications that don't match the actual development plans. Nat, if your family has money in this—" "It's worse than that. Charles wants me to sign something related to it." The silence on the other end was deafening. Don't sign anything, Daniel finally said. And Nat, you might want to start documenting everything, every conversation, every document you see, every strange thing that happens. Trust me on this. After we hung up, I sat in my room, processing this new information. The pressure to sign, the family's desperation, Eleanor's involvement, it all made horrible sense now. They weren't just trying to maintain appearances, they were trying to maintain a lie that was about to collapse. That evening at dinner, I watched them all with new eyes. Charles, confident and commanding, discussing plans for the next phase of development. My mother, nervously cutting her food into smaller and smaller pieces. Eleanor, nodding approvingly at everything Charles said. They were all in on it, whatever this was. They were all complicit. Natalie, Charles said suddenly, his tone deceptively casual. Have you given more thought to those documents? I met his gaze steadily. I have. And? I'd still like my lawyer to review them first. The silence was suffocating, his jaw clenched, that vein pulsing again. But this time, with others watching, he maintained control. Of course, he said, his smile sharp as glass. Family should always be careful with legal matters, though I do hope you remember that family also means trusting each other. Eleanor raised her wine glass. To family. They all raised their glasses. I raised mine too, though the word tasted like ash in my mouth. Family. The people who were supposed to protect you, the ones who instead offered you up to save themselves. But Daniel had given me something they didn't know about, knowledge. And with knowledge came power. They thought the pantry incident had taught me my place. Instead, it had taught me theirs. The next morning, I became a detective in my own home, while Charles was at his office and my mother accompanied him for a strategy meeting. I had the house mostly to myself. Eleanor was at her weekly bridge club, the one social engagement she never missed. I started in Charles's study. The door was always locked, but I'd learned something useful during my teenage years. The old locks in this house all used similar mechanisms. A bobby pin and 5 minutes of patience got me inside. His desk was meticulously organized, but that worked in my favor. I photographed everything: contracts, bank statements, correspondence. My hands shook as I found the Lakeshore Estates folder. $47 million in development costs, but the actual construction estimates were barely $20 million. Where was the rest going? Then I found it. A subsidiary company called Meadowbrook Holdings, registered in Delaware. My mother's signature was on the formation documents, but I recognized Eleanor's handwriting in the margins. Notes about allocation strategies and fund redistribution. They were using my mother's name to funnel money through shell companies. I heard a car in the driveway and quickly returned everything to its place. Slipping out just as the front door opened, my heart was pounding, but I forced myself to appear calm, heading to the kitchen as if I'd just been making lunch. That evening, I called Daniel again from my car, parked at a coffee shop downtown. It's worse than you thought. They're using my mom's company for money laundering. Jesus, Nat, you need to go to the FBI. With what? Photos I took while breaking into his study? They'd destroy me before any investigation even started. And my mom. She'd go down with them. So what's your plan? I thought about it for a long moment. I need someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Someone who could expose this publicly before they can bury it. You mean a journalist? Exactly. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I might know someone, Elliot Graves. He broke that story about the Chicago pension fund scandal last year. He's thorough, protective of sources, and he especially hates financial fraud. Can you introduce us? I'll make the call tonight. 3 days later, I met Elliot at a diner 2 towns over. He was younger than I expected, early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I showed him what I had, watched his expression grow more serious with each document. This is big, he said quietly, but I need more. Email trails, recorded conversations, anything that shows intent. I can get those. Be careful. People have killed for less than $47 million. I started small. A voice recorder app on my phone, always running when Charles was around. I became helpful, offering to organize files for my mother, volunteering to drop off documents at Charles's office. Each interaction was an opportunity to gather evidence. The breakthrough came when I found Charles's second laptop in the pool house during a family barbecue. He'd left it unlocked while taking a call. I plugged in a USB drive, copying everything I could in the 12 minutes he was gone. Emails to offshore accounts, instructions for falsifying inspection reports, correspondence with city officials who were clearly being bribed. But the most damning discovery was about Eleanor. She wasn't just complicit, she was profiting. She'd been skimming from her own charity foundations, moving money through Whitmore Development to clean it. $3 million over 2 years, all while maintaining her reputation as Ravenwood's grande dame of philanthropy. "You look tired, dear," Eleanor commented one evening, finding me in the living room with my laptop. "Just work stuff." She sat across from me, her gaze calculating. "You know, Charles mentioned you've been asking a lot of questions lately about the family business. I'm trying to understand it better. Maybe I was wrong to resist being involved." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a sudden change of heart." "People can change." "Yes," she said slowly. "They can, but rarely for the better, in my experience." We stared at each other, and I knew she suspected something, but she couldn't know how much I'd already found. That night, Charles called a family meeting. He stood at the head of the dining table like a general addressing troops. "We have a problem," he announced. "Someone has been accessing confidential files. Our security system shows unusual activity." My blood ran cold, but I kept my expression neutral. "It might be corporate espionage," he continued, his eyes moving from face to face. "Competitors trying to sabotage Lakeshore Estates. We need to be extremely careful about what we say and do. No discussions of business outside this house. No documents left unsecured." "Should we call the police?" my mother asked nervously. "No," his response was sharp. "We handle this internally, as a family." He looked directly at me when he said that last word. Later that night, I met Elliot again. I handed over everything I'd collected. USB drives, recordings, photos. "This is enough to start," he said. "But it'll take time to verify everything, to build the story properly." "How long?" 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. Can you hold out that long?" I thought about the way Charles had looked at me, the suspicion growing in Eleanor's eyes, my mother's increasing fragility. "I'll have to—" Elliot studied me. "You know, once this breaks, there's no going back. Your family—" "They stopped being my family the night they chose him over me." He nodded slowly. "Then let's burn it all down." As I drove home that night, I felt the weight of what I'd set in motion. But I also felt something else, power. They'd made me feel helpless in that pantry. But now I held their futures in my hands. They just didn't know it yet. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of deception. Charles had hired a private security firm to monitor the house's digital footprint, installed new cameras in the hallways, and even brought in an IT specialist to check all our devices. I played the part of the cooperating family member perfectly, surrendering my laptop and phone for inspection without complaint. They found nothing. Of course, I'd been careful to use public computers at libraries 3 towns over, burner phones purchased with cash, and encrypted communications routed through VPNs. My nonprofit work had taught me about digital privacy, knowledge Charles never suspected I possessed. But the pressure was mounting. Charles had someone following me now, a black sedan that appeared too often to be coincidence. They were subtle about it, but I'd learned to spot them. Parked across from the coffee shop, 3 cars behind me in traffic, idling near the nonprofit where I worked. "You've been going to a lot of libraries lately," Charles commented one evening, his tone casual but eyes sharp. "Research for a grant proposal," I replied smoothly. "Our nonprofit is applying for federal funding. The applications are complex." He didn't look convinced. "Perhaps I could help. I have experience with federal contracts." "That's kind of you, but it's specifically for environmental initiatives, not really your area." His smile was thin. "Everything is my area when it comes to this family." Eleanor had become even more direct in her surveillance. She'd started entering my room when I was out, always with some excuse, bringing laundry, looking for a book she'd lent me, checking if the heating was working properly. I knew she was searching for evidence of my betrayal. I started leaving false trails, innocuous documents about the nonprofit, printed emails about volunteer coordinations, anything to bore her into complacency. The real tension came during a family dinner when Charles made his announcement. "I need everyone to sign these documents by Friday," he said, producing a stack of papers. "It's for restructuring our family trust, tax purposes." I picked up my copy, scanning the legal language. Hidden in the mundane text was what he really wanted: power of attorney over my share of my father's estate, the ability to use my name for corporate filings, and most critically, a clause that would make me legally liable for any business conducted under the family trust. "This seems extensive for tax purposes," I said carefully. "The IRS requires thorough documentation." His voice carried a warning. Eleanor jumped in. "Natalie, dear, we've all signed already, even your mother." I looked at my mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "I'll need to read it thoroughly first." "Of course," Charles said, but his jaw was clenched. "But remember, the deadline for filing is Friday. If you don't sign, the entire family loses the tax benefits, nearly $2 million. The number was a lie, but the threat was clear. That night, my mother came to my room. She looked haggard, aged 10 years in the past few months. "Please," she whispered, "just sign them. He's getting angry, more angry. I'm scared of what he might do." "Mom, what does he have on you?" She started crying silently. "Everything. He controls everything. The house is in his name now, the bank accounts. Even my retirement funds are tied up in his companies. If I leave, I'll have nothing." "Mom, that's financial abuse. We can get help." "No!" Her response was sharp, panicked. "You don't understand. It's not just money. There are things, documents I signed without reading, things he made me do for the business. If it comes out, I'll go to prison." "He manipulated you." "That won't matter to prosecutors." She grabbed my hands. "Please, Natalie, sign the papers. Survive this. That's all we can do now." After she left, I called Elliot from my burner phone. "They're escalating," I told him. "How much longer?" 2 more weeks. I've verified most of it, but I need to confirm the offshore accounts. My source at the Treasury Department is being cautious." "I might not have 2 weeks." "Then stall. Do whatever you have to do." The next day, I made a show of reviewing the documents at the kitchen table, highlighting sections, making notes. Charles watched me like a hawk. "Questions?" he asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Just trying to understand the implications. This clause here about corporate liability." "Standard language, nothing to concern yourself with." Eleanor entered, carrying her tea. "You know, Natalie, I've been thinking about your father." I stiffened. She rarely mentioned Dad. "He would want you to protect this family's interests, to trust the people who've taken care of you. He also taught me to read contracts before signing them." "He taught you many things," she said coolly, "but he's not here now, is he? We are, and we're asking you to be part of this family's future." The subtext was clear: comply or be cast out. But what they didn't know was that I'd already chosen exile. I just needed to survive long enough to ensure they joined me there. That evening, Charles's patience finally snapped. He cornered me in the hallway, his body blocking my escape route. "You will sign those papers tomorrow," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This game you're playing ends now." "Or what?" He smiled coldly. "Your mother mentioned you've been talking to Daniel Morrison lately. It would be unfortunate if his employer learned about some irregularities in his trading history. Irregularities I could easily document." "You're threatening Daniel now?" "I'm protecting my family. Something you seem incapable of understanding. Tomorrow, Natalie, or the consequences spread beyond this house." As he walked away, I realized the countdown had truly begun. 2 weeks was a luxury I no longer had. Whatever Elliot had would have to be enough. That night, I sent him a coded message. Weather turning stormy. Need to evacuate soon. His response came quickly. Understood. Preparing for early departure. The endgame was approaching faster than planned, but I was ready. They'd pushed me into a corner, threatened everyone I cared about, and assumed I'd break. They were about to learn what happened when a cornered animal had nothing left to lose. The story broke on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. I was already awake, had been all night. Sitting in my room with my bags packed and my burner phone in hand, I told Charles I would sign the papers that afternoon, buying myself one last day. He'd smiled triumphantly at dinner, already tasting victory. Then my phone buzzed. Elliot's message was simple. It's live. The headline on the Chicago Tribune's website read, Ravenwood Real Estate Empire Built on Fraud. How Whitmore Development Group Orchestrated a $93 million deception. Elliot had outdone himself. The article was devastating in its thoroughness. Financial records, email transcripts, recorded conversations with city officials admitting to taking bribes. But the masterstrokes were the photos of actual construction sites showing that only a fraction of the reported work had been completed, and documents proving that Charles had been billing the state for non-existent infrastructure improvements. My phone, my real phone, started ringing immediately. I ignored it, watching from my window as Charles burst out of his bedroom, phone pressed to his ear, his face purple with rage. Within an hour, 3 more outlets had picked up the story. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced they were opening an immediate investigation. The Illinois Attorney General's office released a statement that criminal charges were being considered. By 8 a.m., the house was in chaos. Charles was in his study, screaming at his lawyers. Eleanor was on the phone with her contacts, trying desperately to control the narrative. My mother sat at the kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen in shock. The numbers were staggering. The investigation had uncovered not just the Lakeshore Estates fraud, but a pattern going back 6 years. Inflated invoices, phantom employees, tax evasion, and most damningly, the use of Eleanor's charity foundations as money laundering vehicles. The total amount approached $93 million in fraudulent activity. I came downstairs around 9 a.m., playing innocent. What's happening? I asked, finding them all in the living room. Charles turned on me, his eyes wild. You did this. Did what? I've been in my room all morning. Don't lie to me. He advanced on me, but stopped when Eleanor spoke. Charles, the reporters are outside. We need to present a united front. Through the window, I could see news vans gathering. Our quiet street was about to become a circus. Charles's phone rang. His lawyer. I watched his face pale as he listened. The FBI is coming, he said numbly. They have a warrant. For what? Eleanor demanded. Everything. Asset seizure. They're freezing all accounts associated with Whitmore Development and... He looked at Eleanor. The Hayes Family Foundation. Eleanor sank into a chair. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked her age. How? She whispered. How did they get our private information? Charles turned back to me, understanding dawning in his eyes. The missing files, the security breaches, it was you all along. I met his gaze steadily. Prove it. I'll destroy you for this. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, I do. It's all in the article. Did you get to page 3 yet? The part about threatening witnesses? His phone rang again. This time, when he answered, I could hear shouting on the other end. Williams Property Group was severing all ties. The Lakeshore investors were demanding immediate repayment. Every partner was jumping ship. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely audible. Natalie, my signature is on those documents. I'll be arrested. No, Mom, Elliot was careful. The article makes it clear you were coerced. You're listed as a victim, not a perpetrator, but you'll need to cooperate with investigators. You planned all this? She looked at me like she'd never seen me before. I planned to survive, and to stop them from hurting anyone else. The doorbell rang. FBI agents. Charles tried to bar their entry, but they had warrants. They swept through the house, boxing up documents, computers, files. They placed Charles under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. As they led him away in handcuffs, he passed close to me. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Yes, it is." Eleanor was next. The agents were almost apologetic as they arrested Ravenwood's most prominent society matron for charity fraud and money laundering. She maintained her dignity even in handcuffs, but I saw her hands shaking. Before they took her, she looked at me one last time. "Your father would be ashamed." My father would have done the same thing. He just would have done it sooner. Within 48 hours, the complete collapse was stunning. Whitmore Development Group's stock price fell 73%. Construction projects across 3 counties ground to a halt. The Lakeshore Estates was exposed as being only 20% complete, despite Charles claiming it was near finished and collecting payments for units that didn't exist. The investigation revealed that Charles had been selling the same properties to multiple buyers, forging inspection certificates, and bribing city officials to look the other way. The $47 million for Lakeshore Estates? Only $8 million had gone to actual construction. The rest had disappeared into offshore accounts. My mother and I sat in the empty house. The FBI had seized most of the valuable assets. She looked broken, aged, diminished. "What happens now?" she asked. "You'll have to testify, but with cooperation, you'll avoid prosecution. The house is gone, the money's gone, but you'll be free. And you?" "I've already got a new apartment lined up. My job is waiting for me. I'll be fine." She was quiet for a long moment. "You saved me, didn't you? From prison, from him." "I tried to save all of us, Mom, but you and Eleanor chose him." "I was scared." "I know, but being scared doesn't excuse being complicit." The next morning, the Tribune ran a follow-up story. Charles was facing 35 years in federal prison. Eleanor was looking at 15 years. The total fraud was now estimated at $93 million when all the shell companies were accounted for. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers or even the arrests. It was in the quote from one of Charles's former victims, a small contractor he'd destroyed 5 years ago. "Finally, someone stood up to him. Finally, there's justice." I thought about that night in the pantry, when they'd all chosen to look away. They'd thought they were teaching me about power. Who had it? Who didn't? And what happened to those who challenged it? They were right. They did teach me about power. They just didn't realize they were teaching me how to take theirs away. 3 weeks after the arrests, Charles made bail. $2 million posted by some business associate who still believed in him, or more likely, needed him free to protect their own interests. Eleanor remained in custody. No one was willing to risk their reputation bailing out a charity fraudster. I knew he'd come for me. The restraining order I'd filed was just paper, and we both knew it. So when I heard the key in the lock of my mother's house, he still had copies. I was ready. It was 9 p.m. Mom was staying with her sister in Michigan, trying to escape the media attention. I'd come back to collect some personal items, but really, I was waiting for this moment. I stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where everything had started. He found me there, looking older, grayer, diminished in his rumpled suit, but his eyes still held that dangerous gleam. "Enjoying your victory?" His voice was hoarse, controlled. "I'm enjoying the justice." He laughed bitterly. "Justice? You destroyed everything. Your grandmother is in federal prison. Your mother is broken. The family name is ruined." "The family name was already ruined. You just hid it better." He moved closer, and I saw his hands clench. "You have no idea what you've cost me. 30 years of building an empire, gone because of a spiteful little girl. 30 years of stealing. You mean 30 years of lying. Everyone lies. Natalie, everyone steals in their own way. I just did it better than most." "Until you didn't." His face flushed. "I should have dealt with you properly that night in the pantry." "Yes, you should have." I pulled out my phone, showing him it was recording. "But you didn't, and now you're threatening me again, violating your bail conditions." He froze. that familiar vein pulsing in his temple. Everything you say now goes directly to the FBI, I continued. So please, tell me more about what you should have done to me. You think you're so clever. No, I think I'm prepared. There's a difference. He stepped back, his lawyer's instincts finally overriding his rage. But then Eleanor walked in. I hadn't expected her. She was supposed to be in federal custody, but there she stood, having somehow made bail in the last hour, looking gaunt but still carrying herself with that familiar imperious air. Hello, Natalie? Eleanor? She surveyed the kitchen, this ordinary room where our family had imploded. I wanted to see you one last time before the trial. Come to threaten me too? No, I came to tell you something. She moved to the window, looking out at the dark yard. Your father would have been proud of you. I felt my breath catch. What? Oh, I hated it. Hated what you did. But Richard, she used my father's name for the first time in years. He always said the truth was more important than comfort, more important than reputation. She turned to face me. I forgot that. I forgot a lot of things after he died. Charles made a disgusted sound. Don't go soft now, Eleanor. She looked at him with something approaching contempt. Soft? I'm going to federal prison at 73 years old. My charity work, my legacy, everything I built, it's gone. Because I chose you over my own granddaughter. She looked back at me. That night, when I turned up the television, I've played it over in my mind 1,000 times. Each time, I imagined doing something different, standing up, walking in, being the grandmother you deserved. But you didn't. No, I didn't, and that's why we're all here now. She pulled a document from her purse. This is a full confession, everything I did, everything Charles did that I knew about. I've already sent copies to the FBI and Elliot Graves. Charles lunged for the papers, but Eleanor stepped back. It's over, Charles. Accept it. You bitter old woman. Yes, I am bitter, but not at Natalie. She handed me the document. This ensures your mother won't be implicated. I've made it clear she was coerced, that we threatened her. I took the papers, scanning them quickly. It was more than a confession. It was a complete dismantling of Charles's defense strategy. Why? I asked. Because in the end, I have to live with myself. Whatever time I have left, in prison or out, I need to know I finally did the right thing. Charles stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Eleanor and I stood in the kitchen, two women on opposite sides of a war that had destroyed everything between us. The pantry, she said suddenly. I think about you in that pantry every night. Such a small space. You must have felt so trapped. I did. But you weren't, were you? You found a way out. You found a way to trap us instead. I found a way to the truth. She nodded slowly. The truth. She moved toward the door, then paused. I'm pleading guilty tomorrow. Charles will fight it, drag it out. But I'm done. I want you to know that. Thank you. She looked at me one last time. Your father saved every article you wrote for your school newspaper. Did you know that? Even the small ones. He'd say, Eleanor, look what Natalie wrote. She's going to change the world someday. My eyes burned with unexpected tears. He was right, she said simply, and walked out. I stood alone in that kitchen, thinking about my father, about the family we'd once been, about the choices that had led us all here. The pantry door was open, that small space just a closet again, no longer a prison. I walked over and closed it gently. Then I gathered my things and left that house for the last time. Tomorrow would bring more chaos, trials, testimony, the complete dissolution of everything Charles had built. But tonight, in this kitchen where I'd been broken and reborn, I'd received something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, that would take time, if it came at all, but acknowledgement, validation, and strangest of all, respect. The woman who'd turned up the TV to drown out my cries had finally heard me. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds, but it was enough to begin. The federal courthouse in Chicago was packed the day of sentencing. 6 months had passed since that night in the kitchen. Eleanor had kept her word, pleading guilty to all charges. Charles had fought viciously, hiring the best defense team money could buy, but the evidence was overwhelming. I sat in the gallery between my mother and Elliot Graves, who'd become something of a friend through all this. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Reeves, was known for her no-nonsense approach to financial crimes. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "you have been found guilty on 12 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The scope of your crimes is staggering. $93 million stolen through elaborate schemes that destroyed lives, ruined small businesses, and corrupted public institutions." Charles stood rigid, his jaw clenched. He'd lost 40 pounds during the trial. His empire reduced to nothing. The assets had been seized, the properties auctioned, the bank accounts emptied to pay restitution. "I sentence you to 35 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 20 years. The gavel came down like thunder. Charles turned, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. But there was no rage left, just emptiness. They led him away in shackles, and I knew it was truly over. Eleanor's sentencing was briefer. Due to her cooperation and guilty plea, she received 8 years with the possibility of parole in 4. When they let her out, she nodded to me once. We'd never be family again, but perhaps we could eventually be something else. 2 people who'd survived the same war. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but I had one last thing to do. A month later, I stood in a conference room in the Whitmore Development Building, now under new ownership. Across from me sat representatives from 37 families and businesses Charles had defrauded over the years. The recovered assets total approximately $62 million, the court-appointed administrator explained. After legal fees and government penalties, $47 million remains for victim restitution. It wasn't everything they'd lost, but it was something. I watched as contractors who'd been driven to bankruptcy received checks that would let them restart. Families who'd lost their savings on fake property deals got at least partial justice. But my part wasn't about the money. As the controlling shareholder of what remained of my mother's company, cleaned of all criminal association, I had one asset left to distribute. "The Hayes Family Foundation is being dissolved," I announced. "But in its place, we're establishing the Truth and Reconciliation Fund." I signed the documents, transferring my entire inheritance, $3 million that had been protected in a trust my father established before his death, into the fund. This fund will provide legal support for victims of financial abuse, especially those abused by their own families. It will also offer counseling services and safe housing for those trying to escape dangerous situations. My mother squeezed my hand. She'd been in therapy for months, slowly rebuilding herself. We'd never have the relationship we once did, but we were finding a new way forward. As people filed out, thanking me with tears in their eyes, I thought about that night in the pantry, how powerless I'd felt, how alone. But I hadn't been powerless. None of us are. Not really. We just need to find our leverage, our truth, our way to fight back. Daniel found me after the meeting. We'd been dating again for 2 months, slowly, carefully, rebuilding what Charles had tried to destroy. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it. You, me, Elliot, everyone who stood up." "What now?" I looked around the empty conference room, then out at Chicago's skyline. Now I get to live, actually live, without fear, without lies, without secrets. That sounds pretty good. It sounds perfect. 1 year later, I received a letter from federal prison, Eleanor's handwriting, still elegant despite everything. "Natalie, I read about the fund's first year. 43 families helped, 16 successful prosecutions supported. You've done more good in 1 year than I did in 20 with my charities. Your father would be so proud. I know I have no right to be, but I am too. E." I kept the letter, not as forgiveness, but as proof that people can change, even when it seems impossible. Charles never wrote. His appeals were all denied. He'll be 91 when he's eligible for release. The empire he killed for, lied for, destroyed our family for. It vanished like smoke. But from those ashes, something new grew. The fund expanded. Other families came forward with their stories. We built a network of survivors, of truth-tellers, of people who refuse to let power silence them. Sometimes I still dream about that pantry, but now, instead of being trapped, I'm opening the door, letting light in, letting others out. They thought they were teaching me my place that night, small, weak, worthless. Instead, they taught me that even in the smallest, darkest spaces, you can find the strength to bring down an empire. You just have to be willing to tell the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, is the most powerful weapon of all. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're hearing this. Please comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your own experiences and perspectives mean everything to me. Until next time, stay strong and never be afraid to speak your truth.